Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Live Not by Lies live stream. Say that 10 times fast. We're so glad that you've joined us. Our film series, Live Not by Lies, is now out and streaming on the Angel platform, the Angel Guild. And so if you're here, you're probably already aware of that. And we thank you for everybody who's been watching it and tweeting about it and posting about it. With me today is our director extraordinaire, Isaiah Smallman, down in Chattanooga. Hello, Isaiah. And
howdy.
The main feature of our conversation here, the Rod Dreher in Budapest, Hungary. Hello, Rod.
Hey, how are you?
So for those who don't know, again, we'll just give a quick recap, although many of you, of course, will. Rod wrote an incredible book called Live Not by Lies. It came out in 2020. And me and my team read that book. We're captivated by it. We're frightened by it, all the good things, and reached out to Rod, partnered with him to build a team to tell this story. We brought it to our friend Isaiah here, who just put together an incredible take on the materials. We worked with Angel Studios to raise the money. We went and made a film series, 4 episodes, roughly about 50 minutes each. And now that was released over the past month. And we've been out on the road showing it to folks, doing screenings all over the country from LA to DC and everywhere in between with incredible folks like Vice President J.D. Vance, not to bury the lead. That was very exciting to show the film and have him bless it by showing up and speaking about it. We've been with Peter Thiel and Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles and a whole host of folks who are supporters of Rod, supporters of this project, friends of Angel Studios. And so we wanted to get together today to thank you for that. Thank you for the support. Encourage you to go watch it. If you haven't, watch all the episodes, share them with your friends, tell people to sign up at angel.com to become a guild member. And we're going to talk through a few different components of where we stand. It's been a minute since we last spoke with you. But to get us into everything, just want to hear from each of you guys, starting with Zay. Isaiah, how you feeling and what's the experience been like here to release this thing?
Yeah, it's been great. Great to be here. What a fun time we've had, going around such different audiences in each of the different places we've screened it, which has been really interesting. Like the LA vibe was so different than DC, and DC is so different than Nashville and New York. And it's been so cool to just see how impactful the series is, how much people connect with it. There's just been so many great moments where people really felt deeply the stories, felt deeply the warnings that are being issued to them. And yeah, it was just super cool to get to see that all in person. Rod, how are you feeling about it all?
I'm feeling really good about it. The other night we had the first showing in Europe. In fact, the first showing behind the former Iron Curtain. We showed it here in Hungary, in Budapest. And that was really special, especially to have people in the audience who had lived under communism and told me later how grateful they were that finally somebody in the West is paying attention to what happened to them, and not only paying attention to what happened to them, but explaining why what happened to them under communism matters so much today. I've lived here in Budapest for the past 4 years. And whenever I travel around the former communist countries of Eastern Europe, inevitably somebody will ask me, what in the world is going on in America? They'll say to me things like, we used to look to America for hope back under communism, and now we look and see what's happened to your country, and it scares us. It scares us in part because whatever happens in America eventually finds its way here. So to see their stories told on film and to know that it's being seen all over the United States really meant a lot to them. And I got to tell you, Zay, you weren't able to be here in Budapest, but you came to us at the event through Zoom. But if you had been in that room, man, you would have felt the electricity. It was really special.
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah, I could feel a little bit of it. And yeah, Rod, it was interesting. One thing I took away from that screening, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but people were so interested in having a real conversation about it, which was interesting. There were sort of contradictory opinions coming up. And, that was something that I feel like was so interesting because people were not afraid to sort of say how they felt, which was actually, to me, really encouraging. It was an invitation as a result, I think even of the series, for people to speak freely about their feelings about it. And, not everybody saw it exactly the same way, but I think it led to some really interesting conversations.
Yeah. And to that point, communism is not fully past here. I mean, what I mean by that is that even though it's been over 30 years since communism ended, it still matters to politics here. You still have, here in Hungary, for example, the man who leads the left wing opposition is himself a former communist minister. So he's still very much part of politics. What happened in the communist days still matters in the elections they have today. So that was what was so cool too about screening this over here and hearing some of the people in the audience got a little defensive over the claims we were making, because they feel in a way that Americans, we just can't pick up. It's not our history. They're terrified that the ugly truth about communism is going to, in some way, be used against their favorite political candidates today. So I was not anticipating that, to be honest. But then after it happened, I'm like, oh, of course, they're still arguing about it all.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things I really wanted to do in the series. And Rod, you did a great job of this in the book. And so it was kind of just a continuation of that. But, we deal with lots of contemporary subjects and issues that are coming up, but we always do that through the lens of educating people about the pattern of totalitarianism. This is not journalism, this series. It's a story. It's a documentary series that's really exploring all of these stories and bringing them together in a way that ideally teaches people how to spot totalitarianism in all of its forms. Because like you're saying, it's very real in Hungary, but it's very real here in different ways. And at the end of the day, the best way I think to combat that is to learn what is the DNA underlying totalitarianism, not just what is the one way that it kind of manifested itself in this particular place. So it was interesting even, to see like, okay, Hungarians feel a little different, that to them, totalitarianism is a slightly different thing and almost, than it would be here. But again, I think that's why it was, so crucial in the series to kind of boil it down to its most essential components and then really let the stories kind of lead the way.
Yeah, I don't know if you could see this, Zay, from where you were in Chattanooga, zooming in, but when one of the people in the audience made some point about challenges against free speech in Hungary today under a right-wing government, and you should have seen some of the faces in the audience of supporters of the current government. They got all mad and started murmuring. And I think it was all good. But as I tried to explain when somebody asked a hostile question, I said, look, I don't want to live under a right-wing totalitarian government any more than I want to live under a left-wing government. It just so happens that wokeness is a form of soft totalitarianism that has emerged from the political left. But we could get it from the right, too, if we're not careful, because the conditions that we talk about in the film that the political philosopher Hannah Arendt had said need to be present for totalitarianism to rise, they're still present in America today, even though we have, from my point of view, I'm really happy that we have a government in Washington now that's pushing back on some of this stuff. But that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. The mass atomization, as you talk about in the film, that is the most important factor in totalitarianism, that sense of people being very isolated from each other, that's still here. And there are other factors too. But and this also goes to something that was raised in the Nashville screening. Somebody asked us on the stage, do you think this is past now? Because we do have the Trump administration and he's pushing back on wokeness. And if I recall correctly, I told them, no, I'm not. I'm relieved to a certain extent. But again, we're not out of the woods because this could always come back because until and unless we deal with the fundamental conditions out of which totalitarianism arises, any momentary pushback against wokeness, DEI, cancel culture, and all of that, it's tenuous.
Yeah, well, as we reflect on the last few years of getting to know Rod, getting to know these stories, reading the book, partnering with Isaiah, bringing it to Angel Studios. You know, it's funny, just as a sort of inside baseball look behind the curtain part of this. You know, we brought this project to a lot of different entities, a lot of different media companies and others who, for various reasons, didn't want to get involved. Many of whom thought, okay, well, you know, do we want to attract the trouble of a story like this? Is this even real? Is this overblown, this whole idea of totalitarianism, soft totalitarianism? But we knew after reading Rod's book and just being coherent adults over the last 5 to 6 years that people were caring about this. We know, Rod, your book sold well. It had an impact. It had an impact on us. But as I look back and think about what were the moments that really made me want to be a part of this and tell this story, and what inspired me from what you gathered in your book, one of the big things was just the impact and power of telling stories to one another, to reading stories, to, you know, everything from the Bible itself to Lord of the Rings. And I don't know if you want to talk about both. Zay, you jump in as a filmmaker, and then Rod as the person who put all this together and cataloged these stories. But like, I know we just told a story, and then there's stories about stories, and there's stories behind the story of how things were made. But where does that sit for all of you, for each of you, of the importance of that, and where storytelling fits into the resistance that a lot of these amazing people, the fortitude they had, that the inspiration they got a lot of times was from storytelling and film and novels.
Mm-hmm.
Say, what do you want to jump?
Rod, you want to take? Well, yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I think for me, again, it was important from the beginning, and Rod teed this up really well with the way that he approached the book. It was really important that this was not just a bunch of ideas. There had to be characters, there had to be stories, there had to be a true narrative arc. Otherwise, it's just another history book. And to some extent, those are incredibly important, but they connect with people in a different way. You know, you're not gonna reach the masses in quite the same way. Whereas I think everybody can relate to a mom of 6 who's trying to just be a mom and hold her family together and deal with all of the struggles of trying to live within this unfair system. That can be significantly more relatable than, you know, economic policy discussion, which is also important, but it's just, you know, that's going to cater to a different crowd. But Rod, I was actually curious, for other people, I've heard this before, but I'm kind of blanking on the details, so I'd love to hear it again. You know, where did you start with this research? You know, how did you go from, well, actually, you know, the initial story of how you became aware of this is always great to hear, but how did you go from, oh, this might be a thing, to, okay, I'm going to actually go to Eastern Europe and start interviewing these really interesting people?
Yeah, because as is well known, and we talked about this in the first episode, which I hope that everyone watching the live stream has seen. It was 2015 when I got a phone call from a cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic, whose elderly mother is from what was once Czechoslovakia, and she had spent 6 years in prison being tortured because the government called her a Vatican spy. They called her that because they said, stop going to church, and she wouldn't. So they convicted her of being a spy for the Vatican and put her in prison. And he called me and told me that she had said something to him that really upset him. She said, son, the things I see happening in this country now, meaning the United States, reminds me of what it was like when communism first came to power in my own home country. And as we say in the film, I thought that was really an exaggeration. But then I made a point whenever I would travel to conferences or meet people who had come to America from the communist world, I would simply ask them, are the things you see happening today with cancel culture, mind you, this was about 10 years ago when it was really getting going, does it make you think about what you left behind? And of course, all of them said yes. When I finally heard enough of these stories, I said, there's a tale here. There's something that needs to be told. And also feeling the anger that these Americans, these immigrants to America, these refugees from communism, hearing the anger they had that they were not hearing their stories told in the American media, and Americans just didn't take them seriously. That's what made me realize there's a story here. And to be honest, this book sold over 200,000 copies for my publisher, but I had to fight my publisher just to get them to publish the book because they didn't see it. They're in New York. They said, oh, yeah, we have a problem with cancel culture, but come on. It's like totalitarianism. But of course, the book came out 6 months into COVID and after the summer of George Floyd, which prompted such a reaction where so many companies and newspapers, universities, and so forth went way overboard on DEI. It made sense to people. And the thing I love about the storytelling aspect, say, is that it does put voices and faces to these stories. If you had just made a film about the history of all this, it would have been powerful. But in that first episode, when you got that archival footage from the 1980s of Kamila Bendova, the Czech mom, it's a different person than the one I was just talking about. This Czech mom and her late husband, Václav, having to make a decision in real time. There were BBC cameras present filming this in their apartment in the 1980s. They had to make a decision in real time about whether or not to fly the national flag from their apartment window on the holidays celebrating the victory of communism. Because as you hear in the film, all the neighbors in the apartment building were like, come on, just do it. Don't bring trouble. We love your kids. You don't want to hurt your kids' chance of getting into college. But you can see in the film, Camilla's face. She's just a scared mom. All of her kids were under 10 years of age, and she's terrified for them. But she and her husband talk it out right there in front of the cameras and decide they cannot be the kind of mother and father that demonstrate for their kids that they will knuckle under to social pressure to tell a lie. And man, I tell you, that really gets to people. Fast forward to the final episode, the fourth and final episode, which we screened in Nashville. I got to tell you, sitting there and watching Timo Kriška, he's the young Catholic filmmaker and photographer who was just a very small boy when communism ended, but he started thinking about his great-grandfather who had been a Greek Catholic priest. Greek Catholics are Catholic, but their clergy can marry. And the communist government told him, you have to quit being a Catholic priest, become Orthodox, because in those days they controlled the Orthodox Church in that country. You have to do that or you can't be a priest. And he gave up his priestly vocation because he couldn't and wouldn't live that lie. Well, as you find out in the film, Timo got curious about this man whom he had never known, his great-grandfather, went around and interviewed elderly Catholics of that generation who had been to prison and in some cases were tortured for their faith, because he just wanted to know what it was like. And you do such a great job with this, say, in that final segment, you talk about how the core thing you need to resist totalitarianism is courage, the courage to suffer. Suffering, that is the key to resisting totalitarianism. Sitting there in that Nashville audience, I cried. I know this story up and down, backwards and forwards, and still the power of that witness. And this isn't a left or a right-wing thing. It is a human thing, and it is a Christian thing. Those stories, I think if people can make it to the last episode, they'll see that they'll really understand the deepest meaning of the stories these brave men and women tell.
Yeah, it was so transformative for me to get to wrestle with all of that too. And I'm sure you felt the same way, not just to even watch it, which I think will hopefully move people and change their thinking a little bit, but to get to engage with it for such a long period of time in such a deep way was so helpful. And one of the things that, I don't know, I guess it really clicked for me in a new way while we were going through it was, you're right, it's not a left-right thing. At the end of the day, part of what is so scary about where we are now is that if we operate in a society that basically says there is no meaning, there's no higher power, there's no higher authority, then why wouldn't you go along with everything that anyone says to do if there's a threat? Like if there's no God that we're answering to, then why would you put your children in a difficult position and not throw your neighbors in prison? I mean, all of a sudden the whole hierarchy of meaning and value disappears. And so you can see, oh, that's why that is so fundamental to the totalitarian strategy, whether it's communist or soft. Orienting people towards material comfort, material possessions, material, like reputation, earthly things, which are of course not necessarily bad, but when those become the highest order, all of a sudden it doesn't make sense to suffer anymore. Why on earth would you? Now, when you inverse that and say the absolute most important thing is to serve God, no matter what, well, then of course suffering makes. How could you not be ready to do that? And so that the simplified kind of clarity of that came to me, I think, in a bigger way while making this. And I hope people have a similar experience. When you watch these people, you realize, yeah, it was never about political struggle. It was about they just had to serve God. They had to do what they knew was right. And then political struggle sometimes was born out of that. But they had their priorities in order.
That's right. They had their, as J.D. Vance might say, their order amoris, the order of their loves in order. And, this entire series is about what happened in Eastern Europe and in Russia, but it's also about us today. A lot of us like to think that, if we were in that situation, of course we would have done the right thing. We would have stood up for God. But in fact, that's not what happened in Eastern Europe. Camilla told me, I can't remember if this is in the film or not, it's certainly in the book, but she told me, Rod, you mustn't think that all of our fellow Christians were willing to do what my husband and I did. They weren't. They were like everybody else. They kept their heads down. And I know this is definitely in the film. This is why Camilla and her husband, though they were very serious Christians, they allied in the resistance with all these hippies, Václav Havel and all these bohemians, literal bohemians and figurative bohemians, because those hippies had the courage to say no to power and to put their freedom on the line to resist it. And, I hope people in the church today, back in our own country, in the United States, and anywhere in the world where people see this, I hope they will watch what these men and women did and think about what they would do if it comes to that in America. I mean, look, we don't have to say, what would you do if this happens in America? We see it all the time now. There are so many people, even Christians, even political conservatives, who could see something was wrong in the COVID years, against DEI, whatever form this living by lies took. And they never spoke up because they didn't want to risk their jobs. They didn't want to risk people boycotting their business. They didn't even want to risk people thinking, he might be a racist or he might be a this or a that. COVID and the Great Awakening, I think, was a test run for all Americans, especially American Christians, about what would you do if you have to live by lies. And I hope that if, God forbid, we ever have anything like that again, that because of this film, more Americans and more Christians will find the courage to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to cooperate with a lie.
Yeah, and it is so easy to think that it's alarmist or way in the future or way in the past, but it really is so real. I mean, we open the film with a video of Isabel von Spruce, who's a pro-life activist in the UK who was arrested for praying silently in her own head. Again, most people have probably seen that. What's interesting, though, is she's not alone. I mean, that's becoming more common. And actually, we have a text thread with a group that's putting on a screening in London soon. And one of the hosts there sent us a link about a guy in London, I think it was in London, who is recently, there's body cam footage of him being interrogated in his own apartment about the books on his shelf because they're too conservative. That's bonkers. And again, that's happening in the UK, not in the US, but we have a lot of cultural similarities to the UK. Our foundational rights are very similar to theirs, and yet they're getting away with this kind of stuff. It's not crazy that it could be happening here in exactly the same way.
Can I just add, Zay, that man, his name is Julian Folks, 76 years old, a retired police officer. And you know what brought the cops to his house? He tweeted out a warning about anti-Semitism, because his Jewish friends are scared about what's happening in that country with Islamic radicalization. He tweeted out a warning that this could be coming here, this anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic violence where they're rounding up Jews. And that's what brought the cops to his house to go through his things. And as you say, in the body cam footage, they're pulling books off his shelf, and one of them says, that's very Brexity. One of the books they pulled off and found suspicious was a book by Douglas Murray, who is in our film. So if you can get on the wrong side of the police in Britain for having a Douglas Murray book on your bookshelf, what does that say?
It's wild. Well, and it's fascinating to think about how, again, when it's all based on power, then the values can constantly change. And so, you think about, there's been, even here, it's interesting thinking about, like, there was a guy at the New York screening who stood up. He said, I grew up in Czechoslovakia. We fled to America I think he said when he was 17. He loved the series and really related to it. But, it was interesting hearing him, Rod. He was saying, I'm Jewish. I got to America. I felt like I'd never been safer, never been more welcome. And then until a couple years ago. And here's this guy, I think in his 70s, saying all of a sudden, as a Jew in America, he feels very threatened just kind of walking around, and you're like, how is that possible? But again, it's because it's all about power. And so all of a sudden, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it's like, wow, this is not what I would have expected. But there are all sorts of ways that these threats can kind of begin to can begin to manifest and morph and change, which is again why it's so important to understand the DNA of totalitarianism and not just sort of the specific manifestations.
Well, and to that point, after one of the screenings, I was approached by a college professor, a Christian, who told me that his teenage son has become red-pilled towards anti-Semitism from the right, from watching right-wing extremist videos online. And it's tearing this man up because he and the boy's mother did not raise this kid to be a Jew hater. He was raised in a conservative Christian home. And now, because the kid watches so much content online, the kid's like 17 and they can't monitor all of his stuff, he's now become a hardcore anti-Semite. So this is why we can't just think that it's something coming from the left. Our own side, my side anyway, I'm a conservative. We have a problem on our side too. And it's hitting our young men in the same way the Great Awakening hit mostly young women at the beginning. And we can't afford to be complacent and simply to paraphrase Solzhenitsyn's famous line that the line between good and evil passes not between political sides or races or things like that, but down the middle of every human heart. Well, if you think that this problem of totalitarianism, soft or hard, is strictly a left-wing thing, I would refer you to what's happening to so many young men on the American right today. And it's all coming from radicals online. This is, I would say, show this film to your kids, even if your kids aren't on the left. They could be susceptible, especially if they're male, could be susceptible to being propagandized successfully for Jew hating or other forms of really ugly politics from the right. This is a universal problem, not just a left-wing thing.
Yeah. Oh, it's very well said all around here. And, with just to kind of close the loop here on the storytelling aspect of it, and then we're going to play a clip here from JD Vance's talk before our DC premiere screening. And we're going to get to some questions in a second, and then we'll close things out in a little bit. But I just wanted to add, so many of us, the reason Angel Studios exist is because people wanted different types of stories told that they weren't getting from the traditional outlets. And even when you unpack that further, I know from the age of, my earliest memories were reading, the Chronicles of Narnia, or listening to a story my uncle told about this, or my grandpa talking about his, World War II experiences. And so stories, again, not to, wax too poetic about it, but these are important. And, for millions of us around the world and for generations now, something like Lord of the Rings is a huge deal. You read those books, you see those films, and what I love about one of the many things I love about your book, Rod, and what we've tried to capture is, as you alluded to before, Zay has made a film series here that, yes, is a documentary in different categories, but is really a story. It's a love letter. It's an exploration. And so we're so glad that people have responded to the way they have. This thing lives on forever, and we want people to continue to enjoy it and find it and share it with their friends. And then again, to humble brag a little bit, we've been walking in tall cotton, as my late grandpa used to say, in terms of the folks who have seen this and appreciated it and supported it. And I've mentioned some of the names like Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles and Peter Thiel and Barry Weiss in New York. But one of the people we were most excited about was the Vice President of the United States. And before he was a Republican Vice President of the United States, he was Rod's friend. He's an author, served his country in the military, and he was kind enough to speak. And I think we're going to play a little clip here from Vice President Vance's remarks before our DC premiere event last month.
Thanks, Kevin, for that very kind introduction, and of course for your leadership and stewardship of this incredible organization, which has been such an important part of the conservative conversation, and when we get the opportunity of conservative governance in the United States of America, going back, of course, to the presidency of Ronald Reagan and doing a lot of good work since then. So thank you. And thanks to my dear friend Rod Dreher, who has written a number of important books. But I think, Rod, this is your first time you've ever converted a book into a film. Is that right? That's right. Okay, so Rod just follows in my footsteps, it turns out. He writes, he writes books. They do pretty well. He turns them into movies, and hopefully you'll sell some more copies. But let me say just a couple of words about my friendship with Rod Dreher. And he showed me backstage a French interview that he'd done with, I guess, a guy who wasn't very kind to Rod when he gave this interview in French. And you look at this, the subheader on the screen, and it says, Rod Dreher, ami de J.D. Vance, which I don't speak especially good French, but I guess what that means is friend of J.D. Vance, which maybe was meant to tarnish you in that country. But I will say, Rod, that you are a true friend. And I wouldn't be standing here were it not for Rod Dreher. And I think a lot of people don't realize how important he was in the formative years of what became this massive best-selling book, which, of course, launched me into a public career, launched me into a political career from there, and helped me become the Vice President of the United States. And in particular, when the book came out, I think our initial print run was about 10,000 copies. And I remember thinking to myself, if this book sells 10,000 copies, I guess that's a pretty good outcome for a first-time author, a first-time book. And the book came out. I did one interview on TV. The book sold a little bit better than we thought it would sell, but it never, hit the bestseller list. It was never really a fixture of the mainstream conversation. And then I went to England with my wife, and at the time we didn't have any kids, and we were sort of driving around the English countryside. And I got an invite from an author that I knew a little bit. I'd read some of what Rod had written before, certainly at his American Conservative blog, but I didn't know Rod particularly well. And he said, hey, I'd like to do a written interview about your book. It really meant a lot to me. And so it actually was the night of the 2016, one of the nights of the 2016 RNC convention, where I typed up the responses that Rod had sent me, and I sent them off, and I woke up the next morning and he had published them, and I thought, that was fun. And hopefully lead some more people to the book and some of the ideas that I care about. And then the next day after it published, I believe, we hopped on a flight back home to the United States. And, back then, you had really bad internet access on international flights. And I remember I had no way of communicating with the outside world for about the sort of a 10-hour block. And when I left the UK, my book was like number 1,000 on the Amazon list. And when I arrived back in the United States, the book was like number 16 on the Amazon list. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Something clearly happened. And then I had all these emails from Rod Dreher saying, the interview has gone so mega viral that you have crashed the website multiple times. And of course, that launched Hillbilly Elegy into the book that became, like I said, this massive bestseller and really changed my life forever. I'll say, of course, I owe that success to Rod, I think more than any person in American media or in American writing. But it's not just that, because when the book took off, I also needed a friend, because I was all of a sudden, I was doing TV interviews. I had no idea what I was doing. I was talking about big ideas in front of sometimes very hostile audiences. Again, I had no idea what I was doing. And it was the friend that I made, the friendship that I made with Rod Dreher, that gave me this sense of confidence that, yeah, I could stand up before audiences like this, speak my mind, and have something worthwhile to say. And so that entire process really owes so much to the friendship of Rod Dreher. So thank you, Rod. Thanks for being a dear friend and a true friend. And now let me say just a little bit about this book, Live Not by Lies, which I don't know exactly how many books Rod has written. I've read most of them, but not all of them. But I think this is the most important book that Rod has ever written, because it's the most prophetic. I think the book came out in 2019 or 2020. And it's the most prophetic about where Western civilization has gone. And in particular, some of the very founding ideas of the West, the Christian faith on which all Western nations were in some important respect really based on in their original charter, those very ideas have not just fallen out of favor, and they're not just less popular than they were 200 years ago or 300 years ago. Of course, in the case of our friends in Europe, 1,000 years ago, what we've seen is that those ideas have become disfavored. The ruling elite of the societies have become actively hostile to some of the very ideas that those countries were founded on in the first place. And I think Rod's book was an incredibly prophetic insight into that. But I don't take pessimism or sadness or a sense of despair from that. One of the most important lessons I've ever learned is that from a dear friend of mine who helped me return to my own faith was that despair is a sin. And I think that the way to survive, the way to thrive when many of these ideas are attacked, when many of our most important values are criticized or even become justification for being thrown in prison, the way to respond to it is not to conform. And that's the most important lesson of Rod's book. The way to deal with this, the way to deal with being attacked by the ruling elites of a given society is to speak the truth, is to live not by lies. The incentives, the financial rewards, the social benefits of living by lies is too often very great, but Rod's lesson is important. That you're going to sacrifice your soul, you're going to sacrifice your civilization, you're going to sacrifice your family, you're going to sacrifice your country if you give in to the easy pathway. And one of the things that makes me most proud of our administration, not that we've won every battle or win every battle, some of these battles are going to take 20, 30, 40 years for us to see, I think, through to ultimate victory. But the president, I'm very proud to say, is not a person who is afraid by criticism from those in power. And I think if there's anything that sort of ties the first Trump administration to the second Trump administration and the president's entire political career, is that this is a guy with incredible courage. He just doesn't care what other people say about him. He doesn't care what the media writes about him. He's going to do what he thinks is right. And I think in so many important ways, that leadership and that example is, I think, something that Rod previewed in many ways in this book. And of course, now that book is an important documentary. I haven't seen the episode myself. I guess we're going to watch it for the first time, right? It's premiering tonight. Is that right, Rod? So congratulations on that. But I guess the point that I would make to you is we're not going to reclaim our civilization. We're not going to rebuild prosperity and opportunity. We're not going to rebuild the kind of society where we teach children the important virtues and skills to thrive, as opposed to trying to tear our kids down, which is what I think our education system does all too often. We're not going to rebuild a foreign policy that's rooted in our shared interest, rather than in liberal values that were invented 20 or 30 years ago, but have become the animating concept of the foreign policy of too many Western leaders and too many Western nations. We're not going to solve any of these problems unless we have the courage to speak the truth, and unless we have the courage to live the truth. And I will say that one thing I think is true of Rod, and I think is true of much of the conservative movement in 2020, is something that sometimes we're so good at pointing out, or sometimes I should say we were so good at pointing out some very obvious problems that we would sometimes give in to this despair, this idea that because things were not going great in 2020, because things weren't always going in our way electorally, we would give into this sense that the countries that we love, the civilization that we love, was always on a negative trajectory. And I say that as not a criticism of Rod, because I myself have sometimes felt in the lowest moments of American politics that, you know what, maybe this country is just not going in the right direction. But I think that what we've learned over the last few months is that the American people, and I think Western peoples, are a hell of a lot more resilient than our elites give them credit for. Now, that's not to say, again, that this is easy or that it's ever going to be easy, but I think if we speak the truth, if we refuse to live by lies, then I think we can re-deliver on the promise of Western civilization. We can rebuild the kind of society where virtue and freedom and our ancient liberties are preserved and enforced and facilitated by our government rather than torn down by our government. And that's ultimately what this is all about. Yes, there are bad things happening. You see in Europe people arrested for praying, and you have the police asking them, well, what are you praying about? As if it was any of the police's business. Yes, you see people who are thrown in prison or have their jobs destroyed because they don't believe the right things or they don't say the right things according to the liberal intelligentsia that rules some of these societies. But at the same time that you have that happening, you have people of incredible courage speaking up and saying, no, we're not going to live by lies. We're going to speak the truth. You have Western peoples calling out their governments, pushing back on issues like migration and religious freedom in a way that we haven't seen in 20 or 30 years, if we've ever seen it. So I guess my point is that part of living not by lies is to continue to maintain the optimism that I think is really at the root of the Judeo-Christian tradition in the United States of America and in the West. It's that the promise, I'm a devout Christian, I know many of you are, the promise of the Christian faith is not that we're always going to win on a short-term horizon, but that ultimately God calls the shots. He is in control. And if we keep on fighting and we keep on working and we keep on having faith and we keep on pursuing the values that we know are right, I really do believe that we are going to see great things happen. Great things happen in the United States of America, and great things happen all across the West. I know the president knows this. The president believes this. I think if you just look in the past 2 months in this administration, we've gone from a country where we would harass and threaten and investigate and even arrest pro-life protesters to one where we're encouraging pro-life activists to do what they can to persuade their fellow Americans. A couple of months ago, we had social media censorship run amok. We were threatening people's right of free expression for not saying the things that Silicon Valley technology companies told them to say. Now I believe that we have more free speech on the internet today than we've probably had in 10 or 15 years. So we're making progress. We're making steady progress. We're making solid progress. And we'd all do a lot better if we remembered Rod's advice to live not by lies. So I hope that you learned something from this incredible documentary. I hope that this book means as much to you as it did to me. And most importantly, I hope you'll join me in welcoming my dear friend, Rod Dreher. Rod.
You know what was so cool about that JD saying what he did, and I loved how he talked about the role that I played in helping him become vice president. It made me feel really good, frankly, because I never knew that he would be vice president. I just had read Hillbilly Elegy not long after it came out. Not many people were talking about it. I thought it was a fantastic book. I read it. I found JD. He gave me an interview for my column at the American Conservative. We put it on the website on a Friday afternoon in 2016. It went mega viral over the weekend. We had 2 million page views. And within a week to 10 days, JD was on all the national news shows. His book went to number 1. It sat there for over a year, I think. And he was launched. Now, the reason I bring that up now, it's not to brag about myself. I just played a role. But it shows you the effect that people taking a stand it wasn't a controversial stand to defend and promote this book in 2016, but that one little move I made to track this author down and ask him for an interview, it ended up resulting, as JD himself said, in him starting his career as a politician and now becoming vice president. So any good that JD Vance is able to do as vice president of the United States to fight for freedom or for anything else, it can be traced back, as JD said, to that initial interview. So I would hope that the lesson that people take from that is always do the right thing. You never know what God's going to do with a simple deed done, in humility, and just to try to draw attention to people who are worthy, who have a story to tell. And you'll remember the reason that book did so well in 2016, that was the year that Donald Trump was running for president for the first time. And a lot of people just couldn't figure out why were so many middle Americans, especially working class Americans, rallying to Donald Trump's side. And JD, though he was not a Trump supporter at that time, he told the story. And it was the story told by a man who had grown up in a broken household that struggled financially and all the things, but who made it out thanks to his mama, his late grandmother, the U.S. Marine Corps, and then Yale Law School. He made it to the top of our society professionally and economically, but he didn't forget where he came from. And he was able to humanize the kind of Americans that most people in the media, if they notice them at all, is to look down on them as problematic. So the political career of J.D. Vance goes back in a way to storytelling, because he told a great story, and because I saw his great story and magnified it through my interview, we are now where we are.
Yeah, Zay, what was that like? And you can comment on Vice President Vance, but even just again the experience to make a film that we all believed in and is remarkable, and we know it is. You can't watch something like what you've put together here and not be moved by it and inspired, but to then have folks at this other level, and again, not that they're to idolize anybody, but these are impressive folks. What was that like for you, just personally, to sit there in rooms with people like the Vice President and Barry Weiss and others?
Oh, it's great. It's such a dream come true. I mean, so much of the time spent making this, other than production, which is always kind of a dream, was, and Rod will relate as a writer, me sitting in a room by myself, wondering if this is ever even really going to see the light of day. I knew in this case, okay, Angel's putting it out. It's gonna come out eventually. But there's a lot of lonely hours, kind of sitting around wondering if it's actually going to work, if it's going to be impactful, if it will feel cohesive. And so, it's such a dream to get to be in those rooms. And I mean, all of them, again, had such a different flavor. It was so cool getting to sit with Peter Thiel and get to engage with him on the project, because he has one take, and JD Vance's take is very different. And then Barry's take up in New York is very different. But all of them saw the value in the project. They saw the value in promoting the project and bringing their friends and fans and followers together to say, hey, this is important. I'm going to take time out of my schedule and sit down and invite you to watch this with me so that we can talk about it. I mean, that meant a lot. Not just that they watched it and tweeted about it or whatever, but that they showed up in person and invited people to come engage with it. That was really, really cool. And it inspired me to do the same, cause I like to try at least to be somewhat humble about my work, but I've been convicted, like, no, you need to put this in front of people, tell people to go watch it. It's important stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I can say too, that right now in Europe where I live, J.D. Vance's warning in his Munich speech earlier this year, he warned that European governments are spending way too much time trying to repress the freedom of speech of their own people. When their own people speak out about the two-tier justice system in Britain, for example, things like that, their governments come down on them. And JD warned the people in that room, those European political elites, you got to stop this. And the US government under the Trump administration has been pressuring European governments on freedom of speech issues. So if anybody who helped fund the production of Live Not by Lies, I want you to know that what you did with this film, it is making an impact on US government policy at a very big level. So never, to go back to the thing we started out talking about me just really liking JD's book and thinking, what can I do to bring this to people's attention? And look at the effect, the butterfly effect. You know that saying they have about a butterfly flaps his wings in the South Pacific and it becomes a hurricane by the time it gets to America. That's what's happening here. And who knows what's going to happen to some young people sitting somewhere who watch this film, who are convicted by the power of the stories and the courage and the faith of the men and women who tell their stories on camera. Who knows how that's going to change the hearts and the minds of young people and what they might do, what good they might do for the world simply because they heard a story.
Yeah, I love that. Again, beautifully said. All right, so we're going to get to a few questions here in a second, but one thought that just popped into my head is usually we wait till the end. People traditionally do to say thanks to certain people, but in case anyone isn't able to make it to the end, I want to make sure we highlight a few folks who helped us make this along the way. First and foremost, obviously, Angel Studios of being our distribution partner, helping us raise the funds. We literally wouldn't be here without them. So thank you to Angel. And of course, through them, you guys, the audience, the individuals who believed in it. But I'm just thinking of our crew. And again, let's go around and say some thanks. But to Dave, my producing partner, who just remarkable talent, fun guy, who helped really make this thing come to life. Our friends Hummel and Brad and Yozua and others that went and traveled with Zay and the team to shoot it, Kirby and others that were here helping with things like budgets. There's a whole cloud of witnesses around these projects. We'll end with you, Rod, if there's any people you want to thank. But Zay, if you want to chime in, just, who helped us get here?
Yeah, well,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Jay,
Rod.
you first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, especially our investors that came to us through Angel. I mean, these people took a big chance on us. They didn't necessarily know us personally, but they saw the vision. And by the way, there are 2,800 of them, which is wild. And so to every single one of those people, I want to say thanks and make sure to get in there and watch it as well. To my spouse, my wife, Kelly, she deserves a big special thanks for putting up with me as I'm kind of, tearing my hair out, trying to put this thing together. And all the people over in Europe who hosted us so generously, not all of them are on screen. Many of them just welcomed us into their homes and fed us and took care of us, told us their stories, even off camera, and, encouraged us and said, hey, keep going. This is important. So all those people as well.
Yeah, to that point, the only reason my book and this film exist is because so many of these people whose names would have been lost to history, they responded favorably to a request from an American whom they didn't know to let him, that is me, into their lives to listen to their story. And then years later, let the film crew in. There was a really special moment in the production. This is not in the film itself, but we were down in a hidden chamber under a house in Bratislava in Slovakia, where you do see this part in the film. It was in this hidden underground chamber that the underground Catholic Church in that country for 10 years produced samizdat, that is illegal material, prayer books, hymn books, material to keep the church alive under communist persecution. It was all made in that little secret room. And I think this does come out in the film. The offset printing press that they used was smuggled in by Open Doors. That's an evangelical NGO, I guess you can say, a ministry that served the underground church under communism. It's still here today, helping out persecuted Christians. But when the camera crew came out of that underground chamber, the cameraman had tears in his eyes. And he explained to us all that when he was a little boy growing up in the communist era, he's an American. He said his mother and father used to give money to open doors to support the underground church, and they would pray for the persecuted Christians of the communist world every night. And there he is as a grown man and a filmmaker going into an underground chamber where all of this work was done to keep the church alive, and seeing what his parents' prayers, his family's prayers, and their donation, what it had done for people. And he was overwhelmed with emotion. Again, this is a story about there's no gesture too small. You just never know what doing the right thing without any expectation of reward, what it can do for people and the difference it can make in the world.
Yeah, man, that was our friend Brad. Just to highlight Brad out of Tulsa, he's our brother from another mother, incredibly talented filmmaker and cinematographer. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that story, because that really drives home all of that, what we're trying to do and accomplish here. Sorry, Zay, go ahead.
Because that's what we do in the church, right? You know, we're the body of Christ has many parts, and we're all working together to serve God and to serve each other. And Brad didn't expect that. None of us expected that. We didn't know that about him when we all went down there. But when he came out of the hole, all of us in that room got a deeper understanding of what the struggle was about, and how every single one of us, especially we who live in freedom, the role we have to play in helping our brothers and sisters who are persecuted.
Yeah.
All right. So, and we cannot forget. So before, again, peek behind the curtain, before anything ever starts, when you read a book, you listen to a podcast, you get an idea as a film producer, the first thing you have to do is raise some money to be able to put the team together to start any sort of work on that. And so just to highlight a few key names that brought this about, our friend Matt Burford in Birmingham, Ed Greer, Rod, anything you want to say about those guys who helped launch it? And I'll mention a few other names after that.
Yeah, Matt and Ed are old friends of mine from Birmingham, both very solid Christians, and they were instrumental at the very beginning. Ed told me that when he and his wife, Jana, sat down with their kids and showed them the series, you know, they were so proud to be able to see their names, Ed and Jana Greer, as associate producers, and to say to their kids, your mom and dad had a part in making this happen. Anybody in the Angel Guild who gave to this project can do the same thing. Sit down, show it to your kids, show it to your friends, show it to the people you know in your church community, and be proud that God gave you the opportunity to serve in this way, and you took it.
Yeah, and two other quick names, John and Nancy Bowerlin. Many on our team don't even know John and Nancy. They're humble, quiet people living in Orange County, California, friends of mine who were, I believe, actually the very first to support this. So you have to thank these people. It's a long haul, many, in this case, a number of years of waiting and hoping that, hey, we gave some people some money to go do something, and we'd like to see it. And so getting to enjoy episode 1 at Peter Thiel's office in Los Angeles with some of those friends like John and Nancy, that's a lot of why you do it, is it's those relationships and those friendships over the years. So we thank all those people.
Yeah, and I'm going to add too, RJ, so often, so many Christians and conservatives complain that Hollywood never makes movies about us, for us, with our point of view, so on and so forth. Well, Angel Studios gives ordinary people a chance to make that happen. And they did. Angel did. The Angel Guild made this happen. So I want to thank everybody for that, because it's so easy to sit around and complain that how bad things are. But Angel and the backers of this film and all of you, you on the crew, you made a change. You lit a candle in the darkness. You didn't just curse the darkness. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get to at least one question, because I know we're running short on time, and we appreciate everybody sticking with us, and hopefully you've enjoyed this. And hopefully there's more to come in the future, and we can talk about that. And I think right now, I guess the big question I want to throw out to you guys, and I know we get asked this a lot, I do certainly, is, okay, what is there a season 2? Is there more stories to tell? And of course, the big answer to that is, unfortunately, yes, there's a lot of stories of totalitarianism and persecution around the world. That sort of Eastern Bloc, Soviet era portion of the world that is the primary focus of the book and of our film series is just the tip of the iceberg. And we're proud and we're grateful to have gotten the chance to tell that story. But starting with you, Zay, and then Rod chime in as well, where else could or should this story go? What other parts of the country, what other storylines, as you've thought about it, might be of interest to tease out of, if we're lucky enough to maybe get to tell more of this story, as difficult as it is, subject matter wise, it is important and we're inspired by it.
Yeah, I had really interesting conversations with people after both screenings, and not both, but several of the screenings with people whose parents grew up in China, Cambodia, Vietnam. Communism looked very different there. Totalitarianism looks very different there. Let's just be very clear. I think there's some really fascinating stories there. And then Latin America, there's a big streak of it there as well. And a lot of those stories are just either totally unknown or very grossly misunderstood. And I think that would just be such a gift to get to tell some of those.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I've had people who came to America from Cuba, from Venezuela, from China, all saying the same thing. I think China would be particularly interesting because, the people of Cuba, Venezuela, and the people of communist Eastern Europe, they all lived in poverty. But in China today, you have a totalitarianism that has made people rich. Mm-hmm. And they buy people off. I mean, of course, it's a police state with a social credit system and all that. But at the same time, that communist government can sincerely and accurately tell people, we made you rich. China's now rich and powerful. So that makes it even more difficult to stand up against the totalitarianism, because the communist government tries to say, well, if you're against us, then are you against everyone being raised out of poverty, and so on and so forth. So I think that would be a really interesting nuance. In some ways, the story that people who resisted, especially underground church people in China, in wealthy, powerful China, might have a deeper story to tell, one that's more relatable to what's happening in America today, because China is thoroughly digital. That's something that did not exist in the Soviet bloc during communist times there. But China is totally digital, and the whole social credit system that they have, where they're able to monitor and control their population because everybody is online all the time. You have to have your smartphone to do anything. The smartphone is for them an instrument of totalitarian power. And that's something that we're facing now, and we'll be facing even more in the United States in the future.
So as we close things out here, a couple of things to note, and then I want to give each of you guys a chance to say a parting word to the audience. But if you haven't yet watched all 4 episodes, please do. That's how we get to make more stuff. That's how Angel grows its company and offers more filmmakers the opportunity that we've gotten here and that we're very grateful for. So please follow them on social media, share it with your friends, encourage them to sign up for the Guild, to become a member and view these things on the Angel streaming platform. But, for us, again, we're so grateful to be here. We're thankful that people have responded the way they have. And it took that cloud of witnesses that I've referenced, the people behind the camera, in front of it, the promotion, the teams at Angel, Dustin and Caitlin, and everybody that we've been working with. We're thankful for you guys and appreciate that opportunity. And yes, if you want to see more, watch it, share it, let people know. That's the biggest, vote with your clicks, vote with your dollars, vote with your time and your eyeballs, and all those things are monitored and send messages to companies like Angels that you want to see more of the same. But in closing things out, we've talked about a lot of different things. The film, I believe, speaks for itself. The book, Rod's book, Rod, also in your closing remarks, if you want to talk about your most recent book and encourage people to check that out as well. But as you guys look back at the last few years of working on this project together, spending time, being in the trenches, now traveling the last 6 weeks or so with a few more upcoming in London, as you mentioned, Zay, what, any takeaways or things that you want to leave the audience with, your impressions of what this experience has been like?
Well, I can say from my side that if people like what they see and hear in the film series, please go read the book, Live Not by Lies. It has many more stories than we could tell on camera, and it has a lot of detail, the sort of documentary detail that we didn't really get into in the film because the film is about telling the story of human beings. There's a lot more factual stuff in the book that wouldn't really have been appropriate for the film. So the book, Live Not by Lies, is really important if you were moved by this story. Secondly, I would strongly urge people to show this film to young people, to youth groups in your church, to your kids and so forth, because the young do not know anything about communism. I tell the story in the book about a 26-year-old American young woman I met. I know her family. They were a conservative, church-going family. She told me, she was born 2 years after the Soviet Union went away. She told me, I'm a communist. Like, why are you a communist? She said, well, I just love the vision of brotherhood and peace and the equality of all. I said, well, what about the gulags? She said, the what? She had no idea. Young people today do not know. And that's not their fault. It's the fault of my generation and the older generations for not telling them. Well, now you have something that you can show this history to them. It's not boring. It's really, really compelling video to hear these stories. They're going to be riveted by it, and talk to your kids about it too. Ask them, what are they seeing? What would they do if they were put into the position of people like those we see in the film? They need to prepare themselves. We dedicated the book to Father Tomislav Kolakovic, a brave Croatian priest who escaped the Nazis in his own country and went to Slovakia and knew that when the war was over, the communists would be ruling that country. He saw what was coming, even when nobody else wanted to hear it in his country. And the reason the underground church was so powerful there is because Father Kolakovic organized. He talked to young people who were willing to hear his message. And they got together even before the war ended, and they prepared themselves for what was coming. And thank God for it. We have the freedom right now in the United States, all over the West, to do that right here, right now. We had better not miss this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add, a little anecdote from kind of watching the release of this happen. My parents and my grandparents, they share a wall. They don't share a lot of political views at all. And so sometimes that can be very challenging for them. But interestingly, my dad mentioned at one point, hey, we watched the first episode of Live Not by Lies with your grandparents. And I was thinking, oh boy, he's going to tell me about how they were arguing, about their take on it and how, whatever. But it led to some really, really productive, really good conversations between them where I think they could find a ton of common ground in the warning that's there, in the solutions that are being offered. It actually, and throughout the series, they echoed the same thing. So I would just say this can be a great conversation starter. I think it, rather than letting us fall further and further into kind of this divisive mentality that people who disagree with us need to be the enemy, I think that one of the big solutions that we see in the story, one of the things that we see in the witness that these people bore, is that ultimately the way that we can resist totalitarianism is coming together with other people who value truth, who want to be light, who want to, put God first. And if we can unify around that, it's okay if we're not on the same page about every other thing. And so it was really cool to hear, in my own little anecdotal sort of experience, oh wow, this series, rather than pushing people apart, is actually doing some little bit to bring people back together to talk about what's really important. And I hope other people can have the same experience.
Yeah, and RJ, real quick, I want to say that for the last 10 years or so of my professional life, my overriding passion in the books I've written is to prepare the church to thrive, not only to survive, but to thrive under very, very different conditions than any past generation has had to deal with. I wrote The Benedict Option, came out in 2017, Live Not by Lies in 2020. And last fall, my most recent book, Living in Wonder, came out. These three all go at the same problem from different angles. What does it mean to be a faithful Christian today in a post-Christian society, in a society in which most people don't believe, or if they do believe, they believe very weakly? We can't afford to just lay back and think as Christians, oh, everything's going to work out. It's going to be fine in the end. It won't be. If it's fine in the end, it will be because Christians woke up and took action. Now, I'm not just talking about political action. I'm talking about even more so action in the formation of the moral imagination of their children and of their neighbors and of their church community. We don't have to be afraid. God tells us to be not afraid, but we do have to be awake, dare I say it, woke, but in a proper way, right? So these three books and this film, which comes out of the second book, they're all about helping the church prepare. And again, I hope that I'm not fit to tie the sandals of Father Kolakovich, but I hope in some way I've been able to do a little bit of what that saintly and heroic man did for his own people back in the waning days of World War II.
Now, Rod, you've done a lot. Thank you for your friendship and partnership. Zay, thank you for making a beautiful film series. Thank you, Angel, for having us. We hope it's the first of many. Thank you guys for watching, supporting. Please, please, please watch all 4 episodes. Watch them each 4 times if you have to, and share them with friends, sitting down with your children, with neighbors, to talk about these things. So angel.com, become a guild member, click on our episodes, share them, post them, talk about them, and we hope to be back with you soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.